Hey guys, thanks for joining me today on the Great Deconstruction podcast. I think you'll find this interview super interesting. Jamin here is a really interesting guy with an interesting story that he's going to share today. So pay attention, listen to it. I think you'll get a lot from it. And go check out his websites, which are in the link in the description here. Also, while you're doing that, whatever podcasting platform you're listening on, hit the like or the 5-star button, whatever you can do. Give us a little thumbs up or anything that you can to help us get a few more listens. Uh, right now, it's hard for me to publish super often, so it's important that the episodes that I do put out and put all this work into get heard by people. So, share it, tell people about it, and if you really want to be super awesome, subscribe to the Substack at thegreatdeconstruction.substack.com, and you can follow what we're doing, what we're talking about. I write there and I publish the podcast there. So trying to build that audience as well. And you can join the 56 other people currently subscribed, and be a real friend. Be a friend of the show. That'd be cool. Anyway, thanks guys for listening. I'm joined today by Jamin Collar, who was a 39-year fundamentalist Christian youth pastor, music minister, and public speaker, seminary graduate, and 10-year classroom teacher at the Christian school portrayed in the movie 1517 to Paris, which I have not seen. Son of Christian cult leader and author of almostaCult.com and blogger at findinggoddespitereligion.com, all one word. Jamin, welcome to the show. And I
Thank you.
just kind of want to let you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your life and what are all these websites about?
Yeah. Okay. So the almost occult one is just autobiographical, and because of my biography, I guess there's a lot of religion in there, and so I tried to, as much as possible, keep that story non-religious, or at least readable for people who aren't interested in religion. But of course, there's a lot. Growing up as a pastor's kid, there's a lot of religion in there
Yeah.
in that story, and so wherever it kind of like branched off into um just topics that were I figured most people weren't interested in, I try to break those off and just have those be on a separate site. And I put them on the site that I started somewhere in 2009 2010, Finding God Despite Religion, when I was starting to realize I needed a place to store the things that were troubling about the environment that I was in the Christian religious environment that I was in, because I knew throughout my journey, throughout my life as a pastor's kid, like there's probably something to this God thing, because throughout history we keep trying to reinvent this guy, and so there's probably he's probably playing some role here that's important, but the way that humans get involved in that tends to really mess it up in almost every case. So it was just kind of that search for who is this God guy. I'm pretty sure I can't find him in the environment I'm currently in, but I would like to believe that he, she, it, they are out there to be found. So that's kind of the premise of that blog, is a search for God, but being honest about the problems with formalized religion.
I can understand that need. I call it like the God virus. I've never been able to not think about God.
Hmm.
I've never been able to turn that side of me off. And like you were
Yeah.
talking about when you write, how you try to write for different audiences. I don't know
Yeah.
how to not put biblical allegory into writing. I don't know how to not quote Jesus all the time. It's just built into
Right.
me. So I
Yeah.
I completely understand that. It's very hard to try to speak to other worldviews.
Hmm.
I've always struggled with that, and people who aren't like me are always kind of like, well, why are you so obsessed? Shut up about it. Get
Yeah.
over it.
Right.
But it's just
Yeah.
not that simple. It's depending on how you grow up, how you were raised, it can be everything to you. It can be your entire
Yeah.
world.
Well, explicitly, it's supposed to be everything. If you're doing
Right.
it right, it is everything.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all that matters.
Yeah. I've always had a
How
lot
long?
of jealousy for those who didn't have that way of thinking that they can just be casual Christians, but also a fear that those people were doomed for eternal damnation. So,
Yeah, right. Right. There's always that. So, well, how long have you been in your deconstruction, or
I
were
would
you
say it
still?
started in like 2004, 2005, so
Okay.
some time ago. And then I
Yeah.
recognized that I didn't believe in God probably 2006 ish.
Mm,
So, and I would say that I'm in a much healthier place with the concept of God today, but I'm
yeah.
still, pretty solidly in that agnostic atheist, but also somehow a Christian in a way because it does influence everything I do.
Right. Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So in my journey, like I just like got out of the church in 2020, unrelated to COVID, and then it's really only been the last like, man, 6 months that I've pieced together uh I don't even want to call it courage, but like the the forced acknowledgement that probably this is a load of crap.
Yeah.
you know so that's it's interesting to hear you say that you've been out for whatever 15 or so years, and you still find the references to Jesus and
Yeah.
religion,
I
Christianity.
don't think I can undo it. I've kind of
Mm-hmm.
given up on that, and I'm fine with it now. I've just accepted that
Mm-hmm.
that's just part of who I am and how I operate in the world.
Yeah.
So, um, what is the background of your religious upbringing? Where tell me a little more about it. You got this whole timeline. I'm very interested to get access to the site because I feel like it's going to
Yeah.
speak to me a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and why do you need to protect yourself in that way if you can share that kind of
Mm.
thing?
You mean with the membership?
Yeah,
Yeah, my kids. I got a lot of kids, and they don't all know my story. And a lot
uh,
of the characters in my life are important characters in their life, and I want to make sure that um, the first time they are introduced to some of the less savory sides of their favorite people's character is in the context of me and my wife, and that we were able to walk them through that first. So making sure that they don't have access to it. And then there's some legal issues too, threats and stuff from other people that are in the story.
yeah,
So wanted to just not have the hassle of having to defend myself legally
gotcha.
and stuff.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense. I know that
but
feeling too. Yeah, I got all sorts of death threats and stuff whenever I started writing about this. And
wow.
I'm in a very small community, so it was kind of, and I was also well known. I was preaching at like 15 and 16, so
Mm,
it was like, whoa, this guy's dangerous. He's gonna influence our children. Uh, one
yeah.
of the one of the funniest memories I have is probably 2008. I had written a few things and published them in the local news, and it had turned a few pastors uh, it had made them decide that they need to address it at church. So I would just get
Wow.
a flood of friend requests from these 14, 15-year-old kids on
Right.
Facebook, and they were all just trying to get my soul um,
Hmm.
because their pastor had told them, this guy, he's dangerous, stay away from him.
Yeah.
He's gonna change your mind and turn you into an atheist. And there were probably 10 or so kids who reached out to me. And when I
Mm,
realized, they're way too young for me to even discuss anything with them, I was like, don't come to me when you're older. We'll talk. I don't feel comfortable
yeah.
talking to kids.
Yeah.
Anyway, like only two of those kids are still believers today. So I
Hmm.
find that very interesting that their pastors
Hmm.
warned them against it, and I didn't have to do anything. It kind of happened they on their own accord deconstructed. So
Yeah.
if anything, maybe I gave them some ideas, but of their own
Right.
accord, they were able to start piecing together the same things I did when I was,
Yeah.
20 or 21. So
Yeah.
I always found that very interesting. And so I tell people I am just as dangerous as they say.
Well, that permission to think
Yeah,
is and to reach your own conclusions. I mean, that's legitimately dangerous to controlling the narrative. It always has been
absolutely.
in
Yeah,
every narrative controlling situation. So I don't disagree with those pastors. That if
Yeah.
you start thinking, you might think differently.
Yeah.
Um, that's that's scary.
Yeah. I don't know. I have not quite pinpointed where the point of Christian history that it became completely anathema to talk about doubt. Because in the Jewish
Hmm.
religion, that's a huge part of it is you
Yeah,
debate, you discuss, you argue, you wrestle with God. There's this whole
yeah,
narrative of doubt that is part of that religious belief system. And at
hmm
some point, probably in the 3 to 400s, that became completely
yeah,
anathema, and now we cannot do it. Now we cannot wrestle with God, and so I think that's weakened God in such a big way. And I only recently could I even say that because I
yeah,
think that that's a beautiful tradition to argue and
hmm
to wrestle and to try to understand the world.
yeah,
So I think that that's a sad thing to have been lost in the Christian religion. That this is
yeah.
something worth arguing over, or at least
Hmm.
discussing and thinking about, et cetera, et cetera. What was this a denominational church you were raised in, or do you have a lengthy history with various churches?
So the church that my dad was pastor in was a part of um, a group that formally is a denomination, but they kind of deny that term. They say they're a loose affiliation of or fellowship of churches or something like that. That as I understand it, generally means that they don't. Um, how do I put this nicely? They don't feel responsible for what takes place inside the church, but they all get together to fellowship with each other. That might be the nicest way I can put it.
Gotcha. Is this like one of those? God, I can't think of the big one that's out now, but Seacoast is a part of it. Some of these big mega churches are non-denominational, and I think Mark Driscoll was involved in it. I think that was
Yeah. Okay.
is it related to that?
Um, Historically, I'm not entirely sure. It's closer to Foursquare, like
Okay,
back at the Azusa
gotcha.
movement stuff. It broke off in like the early 1900s,
Okay,
um, from what I understand. But they're uh, definitely like heavily leaning towards Pentecostal, but then they don't really mess with stuff that happens inside the church generally, unless it. No, that's going to get mean too.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a loose affiliation of churches that call themselves a denomination. So we would have said we were part of a denomination, but there in our situation there wasn't really any accountability over us, oversight or anything.
right. I mean, even in the places where that is the case, a lot of times that accountability is still absent. It doesn't actually
Yeah,
happen. So
right.
even if you lack that, the potential for harm is still great.
Well, yeah. So, like I said, somewhere in 20 2010 or so, um, like I was. Well, let me back up earlier than that actually. So I had a pretty strong break between the God that we were supposed to be searching for and my parents because they were, as I think a lot of dedicated good pastors are and are supposed to be. You put God first and family second. And in our case, family was a distant second, a very distant second. So there's a pretty strong break in like, oh, like a realization for me of this family thing is really just a vehicle to move the mission forward. And so we were a family to the extent that we could get something done for God. But you have the family of God, which is spiritually, and that's the only way that matters, just as legitimate as your biological family. More so, in fact, because those are the people you're going to be spending eternity with. Your biological family is just like this temporary little missional unit that
Right.
while you're here. And so if you break away from uh, God, then your biological family. So the biological family unit was just a way of getting things done for God, for the mission. And so I understood pretty early on that like this family, this biological family thing is like I have pastors that I live with, but I don't really have parents per se. And so that was really helpful actually because I think a lot of people who left that church, got kicked out of that church, or broke away. There's always that like confusing part about like, well, that person, that pastor represented God to me, and so now that I don't believe in that pastor anymore, what do I do with God? Because that pastor was God to me. I've never really had that, so that was, as we would have said, a blessing for me that I didn't have to do that separation. It was already done for me, in my teen years, and I'd been just kind of living with my pastors for a long time, and so that's, I think, where that we would now call it deconstruction, I guess. But that, like, hey, what about this God thing? Like, I know I can't find out about that God thing here because I can tell that what we're saying about him is really messed up. But what if I'm honest with myself? What really makes sense, or what do I really believe? And the phrase, if I'm honest with myself, um, I mean, that's the work of deconstruction in my journey, is like, there's a lot of really scary stuff in there if you're honest with yourself. um and so, like, my analogy would be something like, um not believing in Santa Claus anymore. Like, if you're honest with yourself, a magical man that visits all the homes in one night, like, if you're honest with yourself, that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
And when I started doing that with Christianity, just stuff fell apart. And I guess now we call that deconstruction. But I think my experience, and a lot of people's experience, isn't like, I'm deconstructing. Like, I don't want to believe in Christianity anymore, so I'm going to start tearing this thing apart, which I think is part of the objection to deconstruction
Yeah.
from the fundamentalists and the evangelicals. Is like, hey, stop dismantling this thing. This thing is valuable. Don't take it apart. And a lot of us are sitting here going, I'm not trying to take anything apart. It's just, it's falling apart on its own. I'm trying to put it back together, but
Yeah.
these pieces keep falling off. And so I think that's, a lot of, hopefully, the tone that comes across in my writing is like, I would love to get back to this. Like, I want Christianity to be real. I want to believe in Santa Claus. Like, that would be awesome. We got Christmas. I love Christmas. I love pretending like I believe in Santa Claus, but I can't get myself there if I'm honest with myself.
Yeah.
And so that's where I kind of am with Christianity. Like, if anyone can point me back, like, I'd love to get saved. Like, send me any Christian that can convince me, but I got to be honest with myself. And if I'm honest with myself, and that's where the deconstruction writing begins, is like, here are the parts that are falling off. Can anyone help me put this back together? And so far, I've gotten the traditional Christian answers of, you can't think your way to God, and you just have to have faith, and we'll pray for you, and, sorry for your soul, and like, none of it actually addressing any of the issues, but
Right.
just kind of pitying me into, I don't know what.
Yeah. Pitying you into a type of, in my case, a type of self-hatred and self-doubt,
Mm,
because, part of me believed that I was throwing the baby out with the bathwater on purpose,
hmm
with intent.
hmm
But my sincere prayer when I started deconstruction was, God, please show me you. I felt
Yep.
crowded out by, uh, the religious authorities that I was familiar with. I felt like, you know, at some point, some fundamental point, they were all about money. There was always some
hmm
financial portion to it. And I have always, I'm a avowed communist, always have been. I read the Communist Manifesto when I was 13 or 14, and it resonated with me, and it resonated with what I understood about Jesus.
Yeah, it sounds
So
like it.
it hit me as, this is how we should live our lives. So,
Right.
and even today it is still a huge part of my life. I still consider myself a communist, and in such a way I also consider myself a Christian communist, because I think that the fundamentals of what Jesus was teaching was, hold all things in common.
Mm-hmm.
Very simple. From each
Yeah.
according to his ability, to each according to his need. Really simple shit
Right.
in my book. But it's also, if I look back at the life of Jesus, I see that kind of message will get you killed by the state, because it
hmm
limits their power. It hurts their power. So
hmm
that it just makes sense to me. And that was coming from, a 13, 14-year-old mind, understanding Jesus at just a base level, reading the
Right.
Gospels. It was all the other shit that had been piled onto it. So heaven and hell, and the rapture, and just all these different little doctrines, and that you must believe X, Y, and Z. All of that's what really started to come apart. but it was in the seeking, trying to understand what is true, trying to find God.
Mm-hmm.
It's where I lost him. And it was my sincere prayer that that would not happen. I was scared to death. It took me 2 years to say the
Yeah.
words out loud that I don't believe anymore. It was terrifying for me.
Right.
Um,
Right.
you said you started writing about in 2010 and you
Mm-hmm.
didn't leave the church until 2020. Tell me, tell me more about that. You
Yeah.
smiled, so.
Well, I mean, the church I was a part of was it was unfortunately not an uncommon experience. It wasn't that weird of a church, but it was extreme. I mean, I can point to a lot of other churches that are very much like it, but there's a lot of the man, what's the list? Controlling what people are allowed to think, say, who they're allowed to go out with, marry, a lot of just enmeshment of every kind, financial, emotional, um, familial. So there was a lot that we were enmeshed with and that we weren't able to get out of. And also, um, that was about the time we started having kids. And if I was going to get out of there with my wife and my kids, I needed to have my wife on board. And she's, um, I would say, eternally optimistic, at least. And so she kept hoping things will, maybe there's a way to make this relationship work. And I saw it differently, but I was willing to wait. So it took her a while to come around to like, yeah, we probably shouldn't be here if we want to raise kids. And so then we started like moving towards removing the enmeshments. We both, worked multiple jobs at the church and school that were there. And and there's all kinds of financial entanglements and stuff. So we kind of had to like piece those out and like prepare ourselves so that we were um, as ready as possible, I guess, or at least what we thought was as ready as possible to actually let them know, hey, we're ready to be shunned by you forever now, and all of our friends and everything. So there's some community building that my wife did ahead of time of like getting other groups, which was, I mean, we wouldn't call it a sin, but it was definitely not allowed. So she was creating her other groups and stuff, and kind of we decided that's the group that we're going to move into once we move out of this group. So we kind of had to prepare ourselves because we had watched hundreds at least of people who like left the church or school and then get cut off, and then someone else leaves and they get cut off. So there wasn't any question about what would happen. It was just a matter of how. And so when we started getting really serious about leaving, we decided, all right, we need to be prepared for getting cut off like everybody else has. So yeah, it was kind of a long journey to prepare for that, and
Okay,
then
that makes sense.
finally going through it. And that whole time, like I was very open to holding on to that same religion because again, I didn't know that it was wrong. I just knew there's some stuff around here seems pretty messed up. And then I started doing my autobiographical writing and stuff, kind of as a recovery mental health project personally. And then once I finished with that, then I kind of had this feeling of like, there's this other theological thing that you haven't really done yet. Because when I got out, my first question was like, it was absolutely horrendous. The leaving, emotionally, in every way that's not spiritual. It was a nightmare. It was hell. And so then when we got out, I was kind of like, all right, what really happened here? I'd never made a list before of. I'd had a sense of like this place is kind of messed up, but it would always get dismissed by whatever church leaders I talked to about it. And so finally I was like, I've always felt like this place was kind of messed up, but I've never really made a list. So I started making a list on paper foolishly, and it grew to hundreds of points. Like I know for sure, like I might be wrong about everything. This might be the perfect God's church. This is the most beautiful place there is, but I know this thing is messed up. And that list of like, I know this thing is messed up just got really, really long. And so it ended up being like, okay, so if I'm honest with myself, these are the things that I know about the world that I grew up in. And so when I finished writing that, I kind of had this sense of like, you haven't really done that theologically yet. Like if I'm honest with myself, here's here's what I think about God, and here's what really makes sense, and and yeah, it's just fallen apart since then. In the most beautiful way, honestly, that you couldn't. I mean, that you couldn't say that sentence to a Christian, unfortunately, but you end up finding out that a lot of the things you were told to believe and then taught to not believe, like God is everywhere, like that's what we say. But if you go out to the lake with your family on Sunday morning instead of going to church, like, well, the God's not there. God's in church.
Right.
so
Yeah.
so the things we say about God are the opposite of what we actually act out. And the truth is, if you go out to the lake, there's a lot of
Yeah.
God to see there. And if you're with your family, dang, there's a lot of family. There's a lot of God to be experienced in your family. And so like all the places where I wasn't supposed to find God, I'm finding him. My hummingbird feeder, the sunrises, sunsets, like just so many places that like, oh, this is God. Yeah, well, this actually is kind of beautiful. The whole like having daily devotions thing or having to confess it to my mentor, that didn't really feel like God, but this kind of feels like God
Yeah.
now that I'm not in church. So I again the title Finding God Despite Religion, like it kind of has fit more and more as I've gotten farther and farther from my religion of origin.
So I went through a phase of being the angry atheist, a
Hmm.
way too long of a phase. Did you have that as well?
I've purposely tried to stay away from that because in a lot of the
For you?
deconstructionist circles that I've seen, a lot of the like, well, I know that God doesn't exist, terminates in something like, well, my pastor was mean to me, or
Mm,
I was raped in the church, or they're always about finances, or like things that could be dismissed with like, oh, but that was because you were in a bad church,
yeah.
like a good church is like this. And so I've tried to keep my writing and also like my own mental process like, okay, maybe that is just a messed up church, like that doesn't necessarily prove that Christianity isn't real.
Right.
So let's just assume that every situation that's bad is humans' fault and just deal with the actual theological, like it's not a bad pastor, like what about the thought behind the pastor?
Yeah.
Is this theology bad? So perhaps I've had something like that, but I've tried to stay away from that as part of my deconstruction because I think it's a legitimate response that the Christians have that, well, maybe that was just a bad person. Like, well, if all of them are bad, it's probably
Yeah.
not,
There's a pattern
but
here.
maybe it was.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to hear about that because I've purposely tried to avoid that. What did that feel like for you?
Well, I would say that I am what you might call a reformed or trying to be reformed right fighter. I always take the most. If I believe something, I will take the most extreme position within that belief system, and I
Hmm.
will fight for it. And I think that's
Hmm.
part of how I grow. It's because so
Hmm.
many times after years of fighting for one thing, I might fall on my face and realize that something is fundamentally wrong with my thinking. It's just how I have to be humiliated in order to learn anything, I guess.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
there was a lot of anger. My emotional state whenever I left the faith was not great. It was a rough
Hmm.
time. You know, um, just trying not to kill myself was like the biggest struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that led me I wasn't really angry at any people. There were some bad influences in my life, but my faith had been pretty much entirely self-imposed. I had
Hmm.
some exposure to church. I was pretty adamant about going to church, but I had really developed my own set of beliefs at a very young age. So it wasn't that I was angry at other people for telling me things that weren't true. That
Yeah.
existed, but there was this it was more of a deep pity that this thing that I want to be true is not. I want it to be
Hmm.
true and it's not. And I'm angry for everyone who's ever lied to you, everyone who's ever lied to the guy who lied to him. Going back to that history where so much has been taken away from this faith that I still struggle to try to understand and want to believe. Uh, I think it just turned into, well, this is all nonsense, and I should tell the whole world. I need to prophesy and make people
Yeah.
understand, preach to people. There was
Yeah.
also an internal goal. I was pretty effective I was pretty effective at getting people knowing when they were at a low point and understanding how I could bring them into the fold. How can I convert you? I was good at it.
Right.
And
Hmm.
there was this internal dialogue with myself all the time, was like, well, I can undo all of that. I can at least deconvert as many as I converted. That was a big part
Wow.
of like my thinking. And going back, it sounds insane and a little toxic because one, I don't think I should have that much influence on anybody's belief system.
Right.
You work it out, you figure it out.
Yeah.
So that, I guess that would be like a summation of my mindset at the time. And I was reading Dawkins, and I was reading uh, Richard Carrier, and just all of the big atheist names that were around in like 2006 to 2012 or so.
Right.
And eventually, I just started to see everything that they say is said in such a bad spirit. They just
Hmm.
have this shit attitude. Richard Dawkins, horrible attitude, and has no religious experience himself. So he's talking about things he
Right.
doesn't understand. And I just hated the way he talked down to people. I hated the way they debated.
Yeah.
I hated the way I sounded whenever I was debating because I was becoming this
Yep.
sarcastic asshole. And that wasn't
Yeah.
appealing to anybody except for
Right.
me. It made me feel good.
Right.
So, you know,
Yeah.
I am
It
a,
feels good.
a constantly evolving person, and I hope that never stops. I've certainly, in the last 2 years since COVID, I have really found a much more peaceful way to discuss God without the
Hmm.
hurt. I don't know what changed really, but it is not nearly as painful. One thing I think that helps is we didn't, when I started this, there was no word for deconstruction. You know,
Yeah.
deconstruction was a different philosophy for, a totally different idea. Um, but when I started seeing deconstruction become such a trend in the last 3 to 5 years, I,
Hmm.
I was like, okay, I'm not alone here, and
Right.
that feels good.
Yeah.
So, and I
Yeah, for sure.
that introduced me to a lot of more liberal ideas within Christianity, because I was hyper conservative. Of course, they would probably say I was hyper liberal at the time,
Right.
but you know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not an interview with me though.
Yeah.
Sorry, sorry, I will take
Oh,
up your time.
that's you're a great story. I find, yeah, the whole like wanting to be a part of the winning team thing is like, that's just unavoidable, and the church has it, with God, and that's got its own, um perhaps, exponent to the hurt factor of, when you're on a team and you're fighting against someone else, if it's, Democrat or Republican or whatever, like, um at least like you're definitely humans fighting each other.
Yeah,
But in the church, when like you've got a person who speaks on behalf of God, like that's
yeah,
uh that's hurtful when you end up disagreeing with them. So yeah, that I can relate to the wanting to be on the right team thing. But part of my I guess what we're calling deconstruction is also like this repeated frustration of like going out for my team, like like David to Goliath, and then finding out that my team didn't really back me up.
yeah,
And so, I would go out there on like Young Earth or something like that. And I'm like, oh, well, this is definitely how it is. And then I'd go back to my team and they'd be like, we don't really believe that, even though we said it. Like, oh, you guys let me down. That happened over and over where I would go out and be like, no, this is what we believe and we know that it's right. And then I'd find some great Christian leader who's like, yeah, we're not really sure that that's right. It's like, I can't. So part of my deconstruction was just like, early on, before I even knew that I was doubting anything, was just like, oh, I can't say anything because we don't really know what we believe. So I'm probably safest. I'm gonna look like a fool the least if I just am less certain about
yeah,
stuff. And as it turns out, that that's been a very helpful stance that I've continued to take.
yeah,
Is just like, oh well, maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe Santa is real. There's a chance. I can't prove he's not real.
yeah.
So
Yes,
there's a chance.
certainty has been the thing that over time I have let go of the most. Uh, I
Yeah.
was absolutely certain that I knew God, had a relationship
Mhm.
with God, and He was directing my path. So
Yeah.
if I believe that, no question, no doubt
Oh yeah.
whatsoever. And slowly, I have let go of more and more certainty, and that is the most freeing thing you can do through deconstruction,
Hmm.
is to let go of the things you think you know, and see what comes next. It gets a lot
Hmm.
easier, and that is the hang up that I've probably talked to a few hundred people now through this process, and
Hmm.
that is the thing that sucks the most. There are some people who have never been super certain. It seems to be easy
Hmm.
as pie for them.
Yeah.
Everybody else, anybody that has that same fundamentalist concept, it is a struggle. It's a real struggle to just say, I don't know, when you used
Yeah.
to know everything, or at least you knew the
Well, that
guy
is
who did.
right, right. Well, and that is the claim of the church. Like we know,
Yeah,
and we say again, the words don't match up with the actions. We say God's too big to be known, and He doesn't fit inside your box and stuff. But we literally build boxes to put Him in.
yeah.
So you show up to them on Sunday morning. So yeah, do you think that's a personality thing or like a structure thing that like some people don't have the certainty gene or something?
I don't know. I've never been able to figure that out. I've just always been really jealous of those types. So
Yeah.
I think for me it seems like a personality thing. It's so embedded in what I want. It
Hmm.
is to know with certainty
Right.
what is or is not true. It is, or at least it always has been, a big driver for me. Not so much these days, because
Hmm.
I am so much more comfortable in uncertainty now. But it's something I
Yeah.
think for someone like me, you have to practice it. You have to
Hmm.
practice not knowing.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think before, I would have like when I encountered someone who was like, I don't think that thing can be known about God. I'd be like, well, it can be, and if you would just try harder, you could know it. Like,
Yeah,
you lazy
yeah. Why don't you
whatever.
know things like I know things?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this is knowable, and you not caring about God enough to figure this out is obviously a character flaw for you. You just wanting to be out there and just do whatever sin you want to do. So you're hoping to not know about God,
Yeah.
but you could know about Him. And now it's so much more. There's such better communion with God when I don't have to know.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah. I find that too. And I even now I struggle with like that phrasing, like communion with God, but I do
yeah.
feel that. I do still feel that.
Hmm.
I just don't know how. I think it goes back to the fact that I had this persona of Mr. Atheist, the
Right.
raging angry guy
Hmm.
who's now having to walk all that back. So I
Hmm.
think a lot of my discomfort with it is how embarrassing, because
Yeah. Right.
if a Christian that used to want to convert me were to look at me now, they'd be like, "Oh, you're probably Christian enough." As long as you believe a little bit,
Okay.
that's proof that I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
so there's a little bit of that, but I have over the years learned to allow my ego to subside and to just let things be. And I do now appreciate the world outside and appreciate
Hmm.
people as if they are created in the image of God. Even if there is no God, that is a big change in how you view people. Yeah, when
Hmm.
you stop seeing people as sinners or people who are self-righteous or whatever, I just see people as made in the image of God as I am. And so that
Hmm.
puts us on an equal footing. We have to treat each other as if uh, one and the other are divine in some way, because in
Yeah.
some way we
I
certainly are.
that is absolutely yeah. That's the golden rule, and all the golden rules that preceded Jesus saying the
Yeah,
golden rule. But
yeah,
like that's and I don't think it stops necessarily at humans. I mean, hopefully that humane treatment of people for the value that they of their existence perpetuates to pets and plants and our I mean the stewardship of our world. We got a really really rare chance is maybe the greatest understatement of the
yeah.
century that to be here with each other
Right,
and yeah uh, to look at another person and devalue them because they're not on this phrase not on the same path as
right.
a Christian person.
Yeah,
Uh, like, man, what a loss of love, what a loss of opportunity. It's really sad that in the name of love, we're missing out on some of the greatest love there is to share.
Right. Yeah. And you said it right, in the name of love. That's the
Hmm.
saddest part about it. You mentioned that you were kind of preparing over, the
Hmm.
course of about 10 years to
Yeah.
to be shunned. And was that
Hmm.
the ultimate result, that you were shunned? And
Hmm. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I was ready actually in like late '90s, like end of high school. I was ready
how old are you?
to
Hold on. How
be
old are you?
old. I think I'm turning 42 this year.
Okay. I'm 37, but
So
you look younger than me in my book.
okay.
So,
Oh, well, thanks.
yeah, you do to me anyway. Maybe it's
I'll take it for now.
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, late '90s. I was ready to be done. But there was a cute girl, as there always is
Damn.
in
Yeah.
these stories. Yeah,
Classic.
and she was sure it could work out, and I stuck around for her, and we're still together. It's great, but um, yeah. So the preparing actually started probably about 3 years before we left. Like we knew we were out, and um just from watching everyone who left, at like almost without exception, every one of them being talked about behind their back and falling away from God. And I don't even mean this as a specific insult to the institution that I was a part of. I think that's just like, if you are in an organization, you can even find this in workplaces, an organization that believes that they are the only ones doing it right, then everyone who leaves, like it's a bummer for them. Like, and I've been in workplaces like that where like someone leaves the company, like, oh, they're going over to the competitors, and they're, about the competitors, they're X, Y, and Z, and like all the negative stuff about it. Like, so it was. I don't mean this as a specific insult to our church, but everyone who left was talked about.
Yeah.
And they were falling away from God, and so, someday they'd be back, and we love them, and we wish them the best, but they're making choices that we can't save them from, and like all that stuff. So like we knew it, at least that was our fate. I knew for sure. My wife again held out hope for longer than hope wanted to hold out, but
Yeah.
um yeah, so that was kind of the our accepted path. And then yeah, when we left, maybe it was super messy. There's at least a million words worth of story in there, but essentially, yeah, we when we left, we we don't have any of the friends. I don't think anyone from that church and school. That might not be true. Almost everyone who was a part of the organization when we left. We don't have contact with them anymore. I haven't had contact with my parents or brother since April of 2020.
Wow.
Um, unfortunately. So yeah, so it all went. The end, we ended up in the same place we knew we were going to end up in.
Yeah.
The path on how we were going to get there, we didn't know, because everyone's got different. Um, they Everyone's got their own like villain story once they leave. Oh well, so and so, they struggled with alcohol anyway, or oh, so and so, they were heavy into pornography, or like whatever the sin is. But like, yeah, we've known about this person. We've known this person wasn't a really good person for a long time. And so you never know what your story is going to be, because a lot
Right.
of it's made up anyway.
Yeah.
And that we've all got, anyone who's been in a mesh system like that. I mean, I think Scientology probably like displays this best, but they all keep records on you of all of your past sins, and so like they can put together a narrative that seems pretty plausible from at least 50% truth. So
Yeah.
that's part of the struggle of leaving that kind of an organization. Is just like, well, so all the stuff that I said in confidence
Yeah.
for the sake of purifying my soul is now going to be used against me.
Yeah. Those things become essentially assassins' bullets to assassinate your character. Every
Hmm.
every little thing you've ever told someone in confidence, and that's
Yeah.
evil. That is
Yeah.
the definition of something evil to do.
Yeah.
Um, wow.
Yeah.
I remember whenever I first left the faith and was, people were reading what I was writing. Uh, People would just show up at my house. It's small, like I said, a small town, so
Mm.
everybody knows everybody. Um,
Yeah.
and the pastor that had performed my wedding just showed up one night, and I was full on, in atheist mode. So I sat there
Hmm.
and debated him for 2 hours on my couch. And I've
Yeah.
had other people come over. One guy came up with the idea somehow that my wife and I had become satanic swingers, and I was just like, what? Where did this come from? But there was this. I've always had an interest in occult, but it didn't mean that
Hmm.
I had become that.
Sure.
But
Sure.
so little things that were true became big
Hmm.
things that were not true. So I,
Yeah.
I remember those sorts of things. I think it's good that you were prepared for what was inevitably going to happen. A lot of people think that because of who they are, because churches tend to make people feel special, at least on the
Hmm.
short term, are
Yeah.
not prepared for the shunning when it does happen.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
it's wise to be prepared for that if you think that you're about to question the tenets of your faith and do whatever your heart does lead you to do in the end there.
Unfortunately, yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's true. And there again, like, my circumstances were in a lot of ways uniquely um, extreme, but it was also like uniquely insightful too, in that there were a lot of people who left the church, and like, you're in the church, you're in the place of searching for truth,
right.
so you feel like, as long as I'm honest, this
Yeah,
is all gonna go well.
yeah.
For good reason. That's what you've been led to believe. So a lot of people go into it really naively, like, oh well, I'm just gonna be honest about how I believe. Like, that's a terrible terrible idea.
Yeah,
Without some forethought, you need to be careful about who you talk to, because that person, it's likely not, like, I don't know, depends on the church. Again, I want to be fair to all the great churches out there and stuff, but
how many of
the
those
like
have
there's
you found? I'm just curious. I've been
there have
trying.
not been.
I have been
Yes.
trying really hard to try to be as kind as I can to the church.
Hmm.
And I mean, I
Hmm.
do find little pockets here and there. I find some wonderful people, but almost always there's just something fundamentally fucked up.
Yeah,
Almost
I'm hoping that's an
always.
American thing.
I
I
don't
I
know.
don't I don't know. I've not been in this for a long time. I'm really holding out hope. Like, again, this is my Santa. Like,
Yeah,
I want this team to win. I'm hoping that
yeah,
somebody wins me over and I get resaved and I regret this whole interview. That'd be great.
yeah.
It just, like, everywhere that I ask for that to happen, the situation just gets worse.
Right.
I just get more and more convinced, like, oh yeah, actually the world makes a lot more sense when I'm not trying to force this thing on that doesn't really fit.
Yeah.
Like, the world makes some sense. Um, so yeah, that's unfortunate. But yeah, in preparing to leave, I did have that insight of, like, oh, like, just because I'm the son of the pastor, that doesn't make me special. Like, the family of God's still the family of God, and I'm still only biology.
Yeah.
So there's nothing special here. So I didn't have that expectation going into it. I did wildly overestimate how uh, introverted and independent I was. I thought, like, I could get by with no friends. I could get by with no one liking me,
Mhm.
which might be true. I didn't understand the impact of everyone not liking me.
Right.
Like, it's not just a matter of, like, I don't need any friends. Like, oh, but it's okay if the whole world hates your guts and says you should die. That's an entirely different feeling. So that rocked my world pretty hard.
I can tell
So
you from a great deal of experience that I own and operate a small business, and once again, small town. It can fuck up your finances to be
yeah,
honest and in a public way.
yeah,
It's been a rough go to
hmm,
be the ire of so many people, and not just about the
yeah,
faith, about other things too, but to be the ire of so many people and to be the type that's outspoken and willing to argue, willing to fight, willing to march, whatever.
yeah,
Um, it can hurt you. I
hmm,
can point out hundreds of thousands of dollars I've lost over the years because of that, and
hmm,
it's I think that's part of what separates me from the church, because typically in a church, and I've seen this in my own community, a pastor will not do anything to upset too many people because
hmm,
they have a
yeah,
financial incentive to keep them happy
right,
and paying tithes.
hmm,
Me, I don't. You're not
Yeah.
paying for my life unless
Hmm.
you're using my services. So
Right.
it doesn't behoove me to lie to you about what I think and what I feel, but it
Right.
does many pastors. And I've had a lot of one-on-one conversations with dozens of pastors in the area and outside of the area. And I find one of the common threads is a lot of them think just like I do. A lot of them
Hmm.
really would love to say the things that I say, but they're just
Hmm.
not willing to. They're never going to be willing to because their
Yeah.
financial situation is tied up in it. So you can't be
Yeah. Well,
honest.
yeah, and their emotional lives are tied up in it too. Like
Right.
I I don't think as many of them are being dishonest, uh, any more dishonest with their congregants than they're being dishonest with themselves.
Right.
But it's
That's
just
true.
it's a scary thing. Again, though, like back to that original phrase of like, if I'm really honest with myself, like that's gonna wreck your life. That not maybe not wreck, but it's gonna wreck everything that currently makes up your life. It's gonna change your life fundamentally,
Yeah.
and a lot of just can't afford to do that. So
Right. You
financially and otherwise.
yeah. You mentioned I've never heard it put this way, so I've been dwelling on it here while we've been talking. You said earlier that your parents were more like living with your pastors. I think I've
Mhm.
never heard that before, but I'm not a PK. So
Mm.
I'm curious, have you talked to any other people that have kind of talked about the same thing? Because that's the first time I've heard that, and it really has my brain churning about
Oh,
PKs.
yeah. I mean, there's a trope about us
Yeah,
that that a certain percentage of us are like the worst sinners, and we are rebellious and stuff.
yeah, that's always been true,
And
and
rebellious.
I've seen.
Fair enough. Okay, fine. Uh, but and I think because I'm so because I'm so rebellious, like I want to rebel against that too. Like I don't want to be that guy. So again, like for one more reason on a whole mountain of them, I don't want to deconstruct because that's like the PK thing to do.
Yeah,
And so like
yeah,
I really wish I believed differently for so many reasons. But yes, with my parents, it wasn't like, honestly, it was a struggle early in my childhood. I'd say consciously from about age 9 to about age 13 or 14. But because I couldn't figure out like why aren't we like doing things as a family? Like why don't we say we love each other and we're kind to each other, but everything, literally everything in our day, from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to sleep, it's all about furthering this building that doesn't really reach that many people for Christ. Like this mission was important, but we weren't actually getting anything done. And I was like, I don't get it. Like there's 150 people in this church, and there's like 10 churches within a half mile of our church.
oh yeah,
So if our church just went away, then nobody would care. They would all just go to different churches. So like, but this thing is like infinitely important that we're like just constantly there. I just couldn't figure it out. Like, why doesn't it matter that I'm their kid, that they're my parents, that like that we're a family? Like why? And it was always just like, well, we're in a really busy season. We're about to get out of this busy season. And it was just like overlapping seasons. And I would say this out loud, like, this is not ever going to end. And it in my 39 years there, it never did. We never weren't in an emergency state. There was never a time of peace, which I think is like, that's part of having a good mission. If your mission ends, then something's wrong. So I think in all those types of environments, it's not just pastors' kids that deal with that, but just like all those environments, you need something to be fighting all the time.
yeah,
And so, but somewhere around like 14 or 15, so I've got this story, and again, trying to stay open to like, maybe I'm wrong about stuff, maybe I just totally made this story up in my head, but I didn't. The story is that like I was working at the church, of course, and it was after church, and I needed something for my dad, and so he's down in front talking to the congregants. Of course, they're all like lined up to ask him questions or whatever about the sermon, or talk about other stuff. He's the pastor, and I'm like trying to do stuff in the background to like set up the stage for worship practice or something like that after church. And so I'm like calling out, I'm like, Dad, Dad, and like this is the guy that I've had some like frustration of, like I can't connect with this guy, like he's my dad, but I can't ever connect with him. And calling out and like repeatedly louder and louder until like the whole entire building of post church congregants are like looking at me as I'm calling out to my dad. And it's like kind of awkward. And so as a joke, I'm like, "Hey, pastor." And his head turned to me and I was like, "Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank God. That makes more sense." I
Mhm.
don't have a dad. Like if I need a pastor, I got a guy I can call on. He's dependable, he's nice, he cares about me. He's a great pastor.
Yeah.
But there's just no dad that I'm calling. And I almost felt guilty in that moment of like, all this time I thought I was so special. Like no one else gets to walk around here calling him dad and demanding things from him as if he were their dad. Like he's on a mission from God. Like
Yeah.
how dare I call him dad? And so in that moment, and again, who knows that this happened, whatever that was, 25 years ago or something like that. But in my memory, like that was the moment at which I was like, oh, this, like, it wasn't even depressing. It was just so relieving of like, life makes so much more sense. And from that point on, I pretty much only called my parents by their pastoral names. And I called him pastor just constantly to everybody. And I didn't really call him anything in the house. A couple times I called him pastor at our house, and it was a little awkward, so I tried to avoid that in the future. But I just like, and that was like a thing for myself of like to just try to remind myself, so I didn't have that really irritating conflict of like not being able to reach my dad. Just like he's pastor. So it's just a way to remind myself of like that's the guy you live with. And as far as I knew, as far as I appreciated him, he was a great pastor. But and my brother, I mean, he lived in the same house, and he's uh he's called them by their whatever familial titles, um and it's worked out for him. So again, I'm willing to be wrong about everything.
Yeah.
Maybe this is all me, but that was my experience.
Yeah,
That was my
that's
story.
that's interesting. That's a perspective I hadn't really thought about. Um, I I only have a few friends that have left the faith that were PKs, and they are unique in a lot of ways, and usually there's a lot of enmity in the family.
Hmm.
But that particular thing I had not heard before or thought
Mm.
about, and so it kind of strikes me in a way. I grew up with heathens. My family didn't think about God at all. So
Mm.
I was the only devout person I knew in my family. So I was the
How
standout.
did
What's that?
Yeah, how did you get into that?
Church camp. It really
Oh, okay.
struck me hard.
Yeah, it's meant to.
Yeah, I recognize it all now, of course, as an adult and as someone who kind of knows how it all works, and someone who's been at the front of the stage too. It's
Yeah.
highly emotionally manipulative, and
Hmm.
it can impact you for a very long time, and it did me.
Hmm. Yeah.
I was semi-Pentecostal, semi-Baptist, or what I call
Yeah.
Baptist-costal.
Yes, ma'am. Right.
Um, and I went to a very Pentecostal church camp when I was very young. So,
Yeah.
and speaking in
Yeah.
tongues, and yeah,
Yeah.
have you seen Jesus Camp?
Yep. Uh-huh.
I
I
very
lived that.
similar
Like,
experience. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I was a church camp speaker for
Okay.
several years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was in charge of that. And I think I mean, uh I would I would hesitate to associate myself with the term emotionally manipulative, because I think the church, at least that brand of church, the brand of church that I think you're talking about, the what is it called, Jesus Camp, uh, church, like the whole thing just sound like, yeah, that was the camp
Yeah.
that I conducted, that I went to. There's such a lack of validation of the emotional experience that I think church, man, yeah, I'm just going to in general use Christian to refer to that brand of Christianity, but that Christian faith doesn't have any room for emotions. Like the heart is deceitfully wicked,
Yeah.
and 100 other verses. I'm not exaggerating at all. Like dozens and dozens of verses that all talk about how you're not supposed to trust your feelings. You just trust your spirit. So I don't think that there's a conscious um, because they're so focused on, like, every emotion that comes in registers as the spirit. That is all that there is. So emotional, when you look at it from this perspective, like, that's definitely 100% emotionally manipulative. Like, you're setting this thing up to be an emotional experience that is going to make them feel like they have experienced something divine, when really it's just a, I'm a worship leader, so it's a C2 suspended chord, and a Plato cadence. Like,
Yeah.
I can list for you the chord changes and the
Yeah.
tempos that will evoke the Holy Spirit. But
Yeah.
that's because there's just no room for the emotion, and so when emotion and spirit get intertwined, and you disacknowledge the existence of emotions, except for as a deceitfully wicked heart thing. Every emotion that you feel that's positive is the Spirit of God. So, at least when I was conducting camps and when I was a worship leader for, goodness, decades, um, it was really about creating an environment and welcoming the Spirit in, and without any, like, ulterior motives at all.
Yeah.
But
But you
also,
also know the
that's the exact
recipe for it. So,
right. Yes. Uh-huh.
yeah.
Right. And that's just the anointing. That's
Right.
that's not, I mean, there's a word for all of it. And these people can have pure motivations, be honest about what they're doing, and also, like, that the sentence, "We're creating an environment that welcomes the Holy Spirit and his anointing," is the exact same sentence as, "We're being emotionally manipulative so that people will feel like that they belong here in
Right.
this place." Like, that's the same exact thing.
Yeah.
But because they both feel divine. Like, it
Yeah.
feels divine to be a part of a community. So it doesn't matter if it's the Rotary Club or it's the church. Like, it's but I just one when you look back on it, for all that they took from your life and all that they put into your life that you've had to get over, like, once that experience spoils, that Christian experience spoils, then you look at it with different terminology of, like, emotionally manipulative, which I fully agree that it is. But I also want to be careful not to um, impugn motives that aren't there. It's not like they're trying to do that. They just
No.
don't know
Yeah.
what they're doing.
Well, I like I said before, I was the guy at the front of the stage at times. I was the guy
Hmm.
doing the manipulating.
Yeah.
Never
Right.
did I think that I was manipulating people, but I
No, you're
always
using them.
thought that I was doing what I was supposed to
Yes.
be doing and doing a holy work in some way. I
Yeah.
really believe that. And that's
Hmm.
one of the reasons why I never was angry at, like, my pastors or the people who had
Hmm.
influenced me so much, was because I
Yeah.
felt like they were just as deceived as me. That
Hmm.
they were victims too, and the people before that were victims too, and just, it
Yeah.
just goes back forever and ever. Um,
Hmm.
and I played drums in the worship team, and I did the soundboard and stuff like that. So I I understand, looking back, that we were just setting a mood, setting a tone.
Hmm. Yeah.
And when I realized exactly what we were doing, I had gone to a Benny Hinn conference, so that should give you an
Uh-huh.
idea of the kind of
Yep.
crazy.
I'm right there with you, man. I'm right there with you.
Damn. You and I might should do some co-hosting.
I'm
I
sorry.
feel like you and I work out pretty well. Similar backgrounds. But I remember it was in Florida, so it was hot, and there was this fine mist of water in the air right before things started.
Hmm.
And it felt big. It felt like it was doing
Hmm.
something in the room.
Hmm.
And it was. It was putting the temperature at a place that was comfortable but not comfortable enough. And it
Hmm.
was increasing the humidity. So over time, you get hotter and hotter. And I realized that when I was sitting there, I was like 15 or 16. I was like, man, something is
Hmm.
up with this, because I could see the
Yeah.
mist floating around. It
Right.
wasn't just dust. And I felt like somebody had done something, that there was some sort of technician somewhere pushing a
Hmm.
water mist onto this
Hmm.
crowd to get them amped
Hmm.
up or to do
Yeah.
something. And it
Yes.
made the air feel thick. And in my mind at the time, it was thick with the Holy Spirit. But what it was,
Right. Yes.
yeah, it was just humidity.
Well,
So,
but again, I don't think those are necessarily different. Like, that's the
no,
same sentence. It's not that it was one instead of the other.
yeah,
Uh, but Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean that was it. That's when I realized that there's more than just manipulating going on. This is thought out. For some of
Hmm.
these ministries, they're really, Benny Hinn and all. I don't think that he is innocent. As much as
Okay,
my pastors were. He seemed
sure.
to have known that he could manipulate people into giving an assload of money to his ministry, and he did
Yes,
a very good job at it.
he did a great job
And
of that.
only recently he has repented of that. Recently, I don't know if
Really,
you
I
know
haven't
that.
heard anything.
Yeah,
No,
he said he would never preach that sort of thing again, that he repented of it. He knew that he had done some wrong things there. I don't know
is he
if,
still healing people?
I don't know. Haven't followed him that
Okay,
closely. He's old now,
I'll check it out.
but
That sounds interesting.
I read a bunch of his books and stuff, and you could see all
Hmm.
the scars of Benny Hinn on my life. But I also
Yeah.
rejected that stuff when I was like 17 or 18. I was like, yeah,
Hmm.
this feels wrong. So I
It's the
got
right
out of
age.
that. One of the things, my coming out of this was very gradual. So it really helped me that I had already left the church. I had already
Hmm.
stopped engaging with people that I thought were heretics. So
Yeah.
coming out of it was pretty easy. I wasn't,
Yeah.
I didn't have a church to answer to. I didn't have a church to shun me. They had already
Right.
kind of decided that I must be going, to the wayside. So
Yeah.
that helped a lot. I'm very fortunate there. But
Mm.
when I left the church, my goal was to find the right church. It just after
Yeah.
3 years, I never found it.
Yeah. That's sad. Yep. I mean, they obviously have something. They've got uh they've got something about community. They've got something about like our species likes to gather in large groups and make our vocal cords vibrate at the same frequency.
Yeah,
There's something magical or divine about that,
yeah,
about taking a meal together. Like they've got it. It feels like they've got all the right traditions, and then just caked on top of it is all this other crap that just wrecks it. And like, no, this you guys aren't wrong.
right.
There's a lot of really great stuff in here that I think from what I've understood, the atheist community has a really hard time replicating. Again,
Yeah,
like
very
there are
true.
just as many dishonest atheists as there are dishonest
Yeah,
Christians. I don't know if that's true or not,
it
but
is.
it sounds good. Uh,
I can affirm.
but like, but like, there's that a certain group of them that are like honest about like the church. The church is providing something. They're also intentionally or accidentally exploiting it for something entirely different.
Yeah,
But there's something there, and trying to recreate that. And I think part of deconstruction, and I'm probably too early in this process to be able to tell like exactly where I am in this, but there's a certain part of that where you like have to decide how much of this am I trying to recreate because it's comfortable, and I wish that it was still there, and how much of this am I trying to recreate because it's actually valuable.
yeah.
And I that's a lot of the stuff that I'm still sorting through now. Um, but there's definitely there's definitely great value in that. Again, like I started out at the beginning saying, like we keep recreating God for a reason. Like we keep recreating religions. There's there's something in us that wants this thing to be real, and it's doing something for us. And I think it's irresponsible to throw it out of, well, yeah. The rest of that sentence is supposed to be throw it out of anger at a particular person or a particular institution. That's my own personal journey. That might not be universally true, but yeah, my for my own journey, I just like I acknowledge I got something, but it's not at all what I was told.
Right.
That
I
might be.
I think what that is, I'm just going to take a stab at solving the whole problem. I think that what we're trying to do is to live in communion. We're trying to find a way to
Mhm,
do that. And I
mhm,
think that if humans were created for any purpose, or if there's anything bigger than us driving us to do something, it's that we are meant to be in communion with one another. We are meant
mhm,
to have common goals. We are meant to have
mhm,
common loves. We are meant to have common enemies. We are meant to take the resources available to us and share them. And that's all
mhm,
communion is.
mhm,
And I believe that that's what we're trying to do, but we keep fucking it
mhm.
up. We try to
Yeah,
make it too divine, or we try to attach all these extra beliefs, like you have to believe Jesus is God, or you have to believe in the triune God. You must believe
right.
X, Y, and Z, or
Yeah,
you're out.
Hmm.
and we're too busy creating out groups to actually enjoy the in group,
Hmm.
and to actually live in communion with one another. But I think that's what we're supposed to be doing. I think
Hmm.
if anything, it is that if we live in communion with one another, we can achieve peace, we can achieve, uh, we can eradicate hunger, we can get rid of the things that make us compete with one another, capitalism and the like. I think that we have this calling to that, and church is
Hmm.
our attempt to answer that call, but it just does a it's a poor substitute for the real thing.
Hmm.
At least
Yeah.
that's my guess. But I also see
Yeah.
everything through the lens of a communist. So
Right. Well, I mean, I idealistically, like that's it does seem like that is possible. I think on the I'm 100% with you on the minute level of like sharing one on one. Like this time that I get to share with you, and I feel like you're being honest with me and I'm being honest with you, and we're sharing something that might not even be true. Like maybe both of us are wrong about every
true.
single
Yeah.
sentence we've said so far. But I'm being honest with you. I'm giving you a piece of me,
All right.
even if it's not true in the dictionary sense. And you're giving me a piece of you. Like there's something that is truly life giving about that. I don't know um, how much you can scale that and
Yeah.
before someone takes over,
Good
which I
question.
think
Yeah.
is probably what you were talking about in the whatever 300 AD time period where it's like
Yeah.
there's this messy church that's like floating around and no one's really in charge of it. How about we get together? Well, yeah, don't let the Christians hear this part of it. But it seems to me that someone said, how about we get together a book and we make it infallible so that they're the official rules and that the book says that we're in charge of what the book means. And you can't really get to God except through us through the book.
Yeah.
Like people just take over that kind of thing, which is true. I think in Christianity, in communism, in farmers markets. I mean, everywhere you get people together that are like trying to all commune with each other. Once it gets to a certain
Hmm.
size, then someone's like, "Oh, I know what we could do with this. How about you all follow me? I've got a good idea." And it happens to make me rich, but that's not why I'm doing it.
Yeah. I have to hear your farmers market story now. There has to be something there.
There's every time we try to do this thing, like the group thing, um some leader emerges
Yeah.
and a certain part of the beauty always dies
Yeah.
um at a certain critical mass. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm a piano teacher. I
I'm
don't know what
still
I'm talking
trying to
about.
figure all that out myself, but I am devoted to the ideology that I hold, but also
Hmm.
I welcome it to be better than anything I ever imagined or that ever has been in history, and that
Yep.
requires us to be different than we are in some ways.
Yes. Well, I think the success of it depends on us being honest with ourselves. That seems to be the part where like things really veer off course from my church to the Nazis to every other group that was trying to do something good and ended up really just being horrifically harmful. um was that somewhere along the lines someone felt like I don't think this is right. I don't really think I should be doing this, but they went with it anyway because the group was doing it, because again it feels divine to go with a group.
Yes.
um and they gave into that, and that's where I just like that phrase, like, if I'm really honest with myself, I don't think I should be doing this, guys. And being allowed to bow out without massive repercussions from the community. I think that's the only thing keeping a larger group in check, is people around the fringes going, I gotta get out. Sorry guys, I can't do this anymore.
Well, Jamin, I'm going.
Don't get to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. Get to God. Be honest with yourself. I mean, I write at findinggoddespitereligion.com and stuff, and you can find me. There's only one Jamin caller on the planet at this point.
Really?
So you can find me. It's Jamin. I'm pretty sure that'll send you to me on all my different platforms. I teach piano. If you want to learn piano, I could teach you that. I know something about that. I don't know anything about God. So
Yeah.
don't find me. Find God. But if you have if you found God, I love talking with people. So don't come to me to learn, but do come to me to share whatever you've learned, because I'm being less certain these days and more open to being honest with myself wherever that leads.